Why, my dear cousin, what a state you are in. Elodie keeps everything for herself, said Baron Hulot. Those Chardons are a blackguard crew. Will you come home to us? Oh, no, no, cried the old man. I would rather go to America. Adeline is on the scent. Oh, if only someone would pay my debts, said the Baron, with a suspicious look, for Salmonen is after me. We have not paid up the arrears, yet your son still owes 100,000 francs. Poor boy. And your pension will not be free before 7 or 8 months if you will wait a minute. I have 2,000 francs here. The Baron held out his hand with fearful avidity. Give it me, Lisbeth, and may God reward you. Give it me, I know where to go. But you will tell me, old wretch. Yes, yes, then I can wait 8 months, for I have discovered a little angel, a good child, an innocent thing, not old enough to be depraved. Do not forget the police court, said Lisbeth, who flattered herself that she would some day see Hulot there. No, it is in the Rue de Charonne, said the Baron, a part of the town where no fuss is made about anything. No one will ever find me there. I am called Pierre Thoric Lisbeth, and I shall be taken for a retired cabinet maker. The girl is fond of me, and I will not allow my back to be shorn any more. No, that has been done, said Lisbeth, looking at his coat. Supposing I take you there. Baron Hulot got into the coach, deserting Mademoiselle Elodie, without taking leave of her, as he might have tossed aside a novel he had finished. In half an hour, during which Baron Hulot talked to Lisbeth of nothing but little Atala Judicifer, he had fallen by degrees to those base passions that ruin old Mensch, set him down with 2,000 francs in his pocket, in the Rue de Charonne, Faubourg Saint Antoine, at the door of a doubtful and sinister-looking house. Good day, cousin. So now you are to be called Thoric. I suppose send none but commissionaires if you need me, and always take them from different parts. Trust me. Oh, I am really very lucky, said the Baron, his face beaming with the prospect of new and future happiness. No one can find him there, said Lisbeth, and she paid the coach at the Boulevard Beaumarchais and returned to the Rue Loyal Grand in the omnibus. On the following day, Crevel was announced at the hour when all the family were together in the drawing-room. Just after breakfast, Celestine flew to throw her arms round her father's neck, and behaved as if she had seen him only the day before, though in fact he had not called there for more than 2 years. Good morning, father, said Victorin, offering his hand. Good morning, children, said the pompous Crevel. Madame la Baronne, I throw myself at your feet. Good heavens, how the children grow! They are pushing us off the perch, grandpa. They say, we want our turn in the sunshine, madame. La Comtesse, you are as lovely as ever, he went on, addressing Hortense. Aha, and here is the best of good money, cousin Betty, the wise virgin. Why, you are really very comfortable here, said he, after scattering these greetings, with a cackle of loud laughter that hardly moved the rubicund muscles of his broad face. He looked at his daughter with some contempt. My dear Celestine, I will make you a present of all my furniture out of the Rue des Sauces. It will just do here. Your drawing-room wants furnishing up. Ha, there is that little rogue Wenceslas well. And are we very good children? I wonder. You must have pretty manners, you know. To make up for those who have none, said Lisbeth. That sarcasm, my dear Lisbeth, has lost its sting. I am going, my dear children, to put an end to the false position in which I have so long been placed. I have come like a good father to announce my approaching marriage, without any circumlocution. You have a perfect right to marry, said Victorin, and for my part, I give you back the promise you made me when you gave me the hand of my dear Celestine. What promise? Said Crevel. Not to marry, replied the lawyer. You will do me the justice to allow that I did not ask you to pledge yourself, that you gave your word quite voluntarily, and in spite of my desire, for I pointed out to you at the time that you were unwise to bind yourself. Yes, I do remember, my dear fellow, said Crevel, ashamed of himself. But on my honor, if you will but live with Madame Crevel, my children, you will find no reason to repent. Your good feeling touches me, Victorin, and you will find that generosity to me is not unrewarded. Come, by the poker, welcome your stepmother, and come to the wedding. But you have not told us the lady's name, Papa, said Celestine. Why, it is an open secret, replied Crevel. Do not let us play at guess. Who can? Lisbeth must have told you. My dear Monsieur Crevel, replied Lisbeth, there are certain names we never utter. Well then, it is Madame Marneffe. Monsieur Crevel, said the lawyer very sternly, neither my wife nor I can be present at that marriage, not out of interest, for I spoke in all sincerity. Just now, yes, I am most happy to think that you may find happiness in this union, but I act on considerations of honor and good feeling, which you must understand, and which I cannot speak of here as they reopen wounds still ready to bleed. The Baroness telegraphed a signal to Hortense, who tucked her little one under her arm, saying, "Come, Wenceslas, and have your bath. Goodbye, Monsieur Crevel." The Baroness also bowed to Crevel without a word, and Crevel could not help smiling at the child's astonishment when threatened with this impromptu tubbing. "You, monsieur," said Victorin, when he found himself alone with Lisbeth. "His wife and his father-in-law are about to marry a woman loaded with the spoils of my father. It was she who, in cold blood, brought him down to such depths. A woman who is the son-in-law's mistress, after ruining the father-in-law, who is the cause of constant grief to my sister, and you fancy that I shall seem to sanction your madness by my presence. I deeply pity you, dear Monsieur Crevel. You have no family feeling. You do not understand the unity of the honor which binds the members of it together. There is no arguing with passions. I have too much reason to know the slaves of their passions are as deaf as they are blind. Your daughter Celestine has too strong a sense of her duty to proffer a word of reproach." "That would indeed be a pretty thing," cried Crevel, trying to cut short this harangue. "Celestine would not be my wife if she made the slightest remonstrance," the lawyer went on, "but I at least may try to stop you before you step over the precipice, especially after giving you ample proof of my disinterestedness. It is not your fortune, it is you that I care about. Nay, to make it quite plain to you, I may add, if it were only to set your mind at ease with regard to your marriage contract, that I am now in a position which leaves me with nothing to wish for." "Thanks to me," exclaimed Crevel, whose face was purple. "Thanks to Celestine's fortune," replied Victorin, "and if you regret having given to your daughter as a present from yourself a sum which is not half what her mother left her, I can only say that we are prepared to give it back." "And do you not know, my respected son-in-law," said Crevel, striking an attitude, "that, under the shelter of my name, Madame Marneffe is not called upon to answer for her conduct, excepting as my wifey is Madame Crevel?" "That is no doubt quite the correct thing," said the lawyer, "very generous so far as the affections are concerned, and the vagaries of passion. But I know of no name, nor law nor title, that can shelter the theft of 300,000 francs, so meanly wrung from my father. I tell you plainly, my dear father-in-law, your future wife is unworthy of you. She is false to you, and is madly in love with my brother-in-law Steinbach, whose debts she had paid." "It is I who paid them." "Very good," said Hulot. "I am glad for Count Steinbach's sake. He may some day repay the money, but he is loved, much loved, and often." "Loved?" cried Crevel, whose face showed his utter bewilderment. "It is cowardly and dirty and mean, and cheap to calumniate a woman when a man says such things. Monsieur, he must bring proof." "I will bring proof. I shall expect it. By the day after tomorrow, my dear Monsieur Crevel, I shall be able to tell you the day, the hour, the very minute, when I can expose the horrible depravity of your future wife." "Very well, I shall be delighted," said Crevel, who had recovered himself. "Goodbye, my children, for the present. Goodbye, Lisbeth." "See him out, Lisbeth," said Celestine in an undertone. "And is this the way you take yourself off?" cried Lisbeth to Crevel. "Aha," said Crevel, "my son-in-law is too clever by half he is getting on the courts, and the chamber judicial trickery and political dodges are making a man of him, with a vengeance. So he knows I am to be married on Wednesday, and on a Sunday my gentleman proposes to fix the hour within 3 days. When he can prove that my wife is unworthy of me, that is a good story. Well, I am going back to sign the contract. Come with me, Lisbeth, eyes, come. They will never know I meant to have left Celestine 40,000 francs a year. But Hulot has just behaved in a way to alienate my affection forever. Give me 10 minutes, Pierre. Crevel, wait for me in your carriage. At the gate, I will make some excuse for going out." "Very well, all right. My dears," said Lisbeth, who found all the family reassembled in the drawing-room, "I am going with Crevel. The marriage contract is to be signed this afternoon, and I shall hear what he has settled. It will probably be my last visit to that woman. Your father is furious. He will disinherit you." "His vanity will prevent that," said the son-in-law. "He was bent on owning the estate of Persles, and he will keep it. I know him. Even if he were to have children, Celestine would still have half of what he might leave. The law forbids his giving away all his fortune still. These questions are nothing to me. I am only thinking of our honor. Go then, cousin." And he pressed Lisbeth's hand and listened carefully to the contract. 20 minutes after Lisbeth and Crevel reached the house in the Rue Barbet, where Madame Marneffe was awaiting in mild impatience the result of a step taken by her commands. Valerie had in the end fallen a prey to the absorbing love which once in her life masters a woman's heart Wenceslas was its object, and a failure as an artist he became in Madame Marneffe's, hands a lover so perfect that he was to her what she had been to Baron Hulot. Valerie was holding a slipper in one hand and Steinbach clasped the other, while her head rested on his shoulder the rambling conversation, in which they had been engaged, ever since Crevel went out may be ticketed like certain lengthy literary efforts of our day all rights reserved for it cannot be reproduced, this masterpiece of personal poetry, naturally brought a regret to the artist's lips, and he said not without some bitterness. What a pity it is that I married for, if I had but waited as Lisbeth told me, I might now have married you. Who but a Pole would wish to make a wife of a devoted mistress, cried Valerie, to change love into duty and pleasure into a bore. I know you to be so fickle, replied Steinbach. Did I not hear you talking to Lisbeth of that Brazilian Baron Montes? Do you want to rid me of him? It would be the only way to hinder his seeing you, said the ex-sculptor. Let me tell you, my darling fur, I tell you everything, said Valerie. I was saving him up for a husband that promises. I have made to that man long before I knew. You, said she in reply to a movement from Wenceslas. And those promises of which he avails himself to plague me oblige me to get married almost secretly, for if he should hear that I am marrying Crevel, he is the sort of man that would kill me. Oh, as to that, said Steinbach with a scornful expression, which conveyed that such a danger was small indeed for a woman beloved by a Pole. And in the matter of valor, there is no brag or bravado in a Pole, so thoroughly and seriously brave are they all. And that idiot Crevel, she went on, who wants to make a great display, and indulge his taste for inexpensive magnificence, in honor of the wedding, places me in difficulties from which I see no escape. Could Valerie confess to this man, whom she adored, that since the discomfiture of Baron Hulot, this Baron Henry Montes had inherited the privilege of calling on her at all hours of the day or night, and that notwithstanding her cleverness, she was still puzzled to find a cause of quarrel, in which the Brazilian might seem to be solely in the wrong? She knew the Baron's almost savage temper not, unlike Lisbeth's, do well not to quake, as she thought of this Othello of Rio de Janeiro. As the carriage drove up, Steinbach released Valerie, for his arm was round her waist, and took up a newspaper in which he was found. Absorbed, Valerie was stitching with elaborate care at the slippers. She was working for Crevel. How they slander her, whispered Lisbeth to Crevel, pointing to this picture. As they opened the door, look at her hair, not in the least tumbled to hear Victorin. You might have expected to find two turtle doves in a nest. My dear Lisbeth, cried Crevel in his favorite position, you see that to turn Lucretia into Aspasia, you have only to inspire a passion. And have I not always told you, said Lisbeth, that women like a burly profligate like you? And she would be most ungrateful too, said Crevel, for as to the money I have spent here, Grindat, and I alone can tell. And he waved a hand at the staircase. In decorating this house, which Crevel regarded as his own, Grindat had tried to compete with Claretti, in whose hands the Duc de Hérouville had placed Josepha's villa, but Crevel, incapable of understanding art, had, like all sordid souls, wanted to spend a certain sum fixed beforehand. Grindat, fettered by a contract, had found it impossible to embody his architectural dream. The difference between Josepha's house and that in the Rue Barbet was just that, between the individual stamp on things and commonness. The objects you admired at Crevel's were to be bought in any shop. These two types of luxury are divided by the river million. A mirror, if unique, is worth 6,000 francs. A mirror, designed by a manufacturer, who turns them out by the dozen, costs 500. A genuine luster by Boule will sell at a public auction for 3,000 francs. The same thing reproduced by casting may be made for 1,000 or 1,200. One is archaeologically what a picture by Raphael is in painting. The other is a copy. At what would you value a copy of a Raphael? Thus Crevel's mansion was a splendid example of the luxury of idiots, while Josepha's was a perfect model of an artist's home. War is declared, said Crevel, going up to Madame Marneffe. She rang the bell. Go and find Monsieur Berthier, said she to the manservant, and do not return without him. If you had succeeded, said she, embracing Crevel, we would have postponed our happiness, my dear daddy, and have given a really splendid entertainment. But when a whole family is set against a match, my dear, decency requires that the wedding shall be a quiet one, especially when the lady is a widow. On the contrary, I intend to make a display of magnificence, a la Louis Roman XIV, said Crevel, who of late had held the 18th century. Rather cheap. I have ordered new carriages. There is one for Monsieur, and one for Madame, two neat coupes. and a chaise a handsome travelling carriage with a splendid hammercloth on springs that tremble like Madame Hulot. Oh ho, you intend then you have ceased to be my lamb, no? No, my friend, you will do what I intend, we will sign the contract quietly just our Sylvester this afternoon. Then on Wednesday, we will be regularly married, really married in mufti. As my poor mother would have said, we will walk to church plainly dressed, and have only a low mass. Our witnesses are Stidman, Steinbach, Vignon, and Massall, all wide-awake men who will be at the marry by chance, and who will so far sacrifice themselves as to attend mass. Your colleague will perform the civil marriage for once in a way as early as 9:30. Mass is at 10. We shall be at home to breakfast by 11:30. I have promised our guests that we will sit at table. Till the evening there will be Bixiou, your old official chum, du Tillet, Lausto, Vernisset, Leon, Delora, Vernu, all the wittiest men in Paris, who will not know that we are married. We will play them a little trick. We will get just a little tipsy. And Lisbeth must join us. I want her to study matrimony. Bixiou shall make love to her and enlighten her darkness. For 2 hours, Madame Marneffe went on talking nonsense, and Crevel made this judicious reflection. How can so light-hearted a creature be utterly depraved, feather-brained, yes, but wicked nonsense? Well, and what did the young people say about me, said Valerie to Crevel at a moment when he sat down by her on the sofa. All sorts of horrors. They will have it that you have a criminal passion for Wenceslas, you, who are virtue itself. I love him, I should think so, my little Wenceslas, cried Valerie, calling the artist to her, taking his face in her hands, and kissing his forehead. A poor boy with no fortune, and no one to depend on, cast off by a carroty giraffe. What do you expect? Crevel Wenceslas is my poet, and I love him as if he were my own child, and make no secret of it. By your virtuous women see evil everywhere, and in everything. Bless me, could they not sit by a man? Without doing wrong, I am a spoilt child, who has had all it ever wanted, and bonbons no longer excite me. Poor things, I am sorry for them. And who slandered me so? Victorine, said Crevel. Then why did you not stop his mouth, the odious legal macaw, with the story of the 200,000 francs, and his mamma? Oh, the Baroness had fled, said Lisbeth. They had better take care, Lisbeth, said Madame Marneffe, with a frown. Either they will receive me, and do it handsomely, and come to their stepmother's house all the partier. I will see them in lower depths than the Baron has reached. And you may tell them I said so. At last, I shall turn nasty, on my honor. I believe that evil is the scythe with which to cut down the good. At 3 o'clock, Monsieur Berthier Cardot's successor read the marriage contract, after a short conference with Crevel, for some of the articles were made conditional on the action taken by Monsieur and Madame Victorine Hulot. Crevel settled on his wife a fortune consisting in the first place of 40,000 francs in dividends on specified securities, secondly of the house, and all its contents, and thirdly of 3 million francs not invested. He also assigned to his wife every benefit allowed by law. He left all the property free of duty, and in the event of their dying without issue, each devised to the survivor the whole of their property and real estate. By this arrangement, the fortune left to Celestine and her husband was reduced to 2 millions of francs in capital. If Crevel and his second wife should have children, Celestine's share was limited to 500,000 francs, as the life interest in the rest was to accrue to Valerie. This would be about the 9th part of his whole real and personal estate. Lisbeth returned to dine in the Rue Loyal. Grand despair written on her face, she explained and bewailed the terms of the marriage contract, but found Celestine and her husband insensible to the disastrous news. You have provoked your father, my children. Madame Marneffe swears that you shall receive Monsieur Crevel's wife and go to her house, said she. Never, said Victorine. Never, said Celestine. Never, said Hortense. Lisbeth was possessed by the wish to crush the haughty attitude assumed by all the Hulots. She seems to have arms that she can turn against you, she replied. I do not know all about it, but I shall find out. She spoke vaguely of some history of 200,000 francs in which Adeline is implicated. The Baroness fell gently backward on the sofa she was sitting on in a fit of hysterical sobbing. Go there, go, my children, she cried. Receive the woman. Monsieur Crevel is an infamous wretch. He deserves the worst punishment imaginable. Do as the woman desires you. She is a monster. She knows all. After gasping out these words with tears and sobs, Madame Hulot collected her strength to go to her room, leaning on her daughter and Celestine. What is the meaning of all this? Cried Lisbeth, left alone with Victorine. The lawyer stood rigid in very natural dismay and did not hear her. What is the matter, my dear Victorin? I am horrified, said he, and his face scowled darkly. Woe to anybody who hurts my mother, I have no scruples. Then I would crush that woman like a viper. If I could, what does she attack my mother's life, my mother's honor? She said, but do not repeat it, my dear Victorinch, said you should all fall lower even than your father. And she scolded Crevel roundly, for not having shut your mouths with this secret, that seems to be such a terror to Adeline. A doctor was sent for the Baroness was evidently worse. He gave her a draught containing a large dose of opium, and Adeline, having swallowed it, fell into a deep sleep. But the whole family were greatly alarmed. Early next morning, Victorin went out, and on his way to the courts called at the prefecture of the police, where he begged Vautrin, the head of the detective department, to send him Madame de Saint-Esteve. We are forbidden, monsieur, to meddle in your affairs, but Madame de Saint-Esteve is in business, and will attend to your orders, replied this famous police officer. On his return home, the unhappy lawyer was told that his mother's reason was endangered. Dr. Bianchon, Dr. Larrabit, and Professor Angard had met in consultation, and were prepared to apply heroic remedies to hinder the rush of blood to the head at the moment when Victorin was listening to Dr. Bianchon, who was giving him at some length his reasons for hoping that the crisis might be got over. The manservant announced that a client, Madame de Saint-Esteve, was waiting to see him. Victorin left Bianchon in the middle of a sentence and flew downstairs like a madman. Is there any hereditary lunacy in the family, said Bianchon, addressing Larrabit. The doctors departed, leaving a hospital attendant instructed by them to watch Madame Hulot. A whole life of virtue was the only sentence the sufferer had spoken since the attack. Lisbeth never left Adeline's bedside. She sat up all night and was much admired by the two younger women. Well, my dear Madame de Saint-Esteve, said Victorin, showing the dreadful old woman into his study, and carefully shutting the doors, how are we getting on? Aha, my dear friend, said she, looking at Victorin with cold irony, so you have thought things over. Have you done anything? Will you pay 50,000 francs? Yes, replied Victorin, for we must get on. Do you know that by one single phrase that woman has endangered my mother's life, and reason, so I say get on. We have got on, replied the old woman. Well, cried Victorin with a gulp. Well, you do not cry off the expenses. On the contrary, they run up to 23,000 francs already. Victorin looked helplessly at the woman. Well, could we hoodwink you, one of the shining lights of the law, said she. For that sum we have secured a maid's conscience, and a picture by Raphael is not dear. Hulot, still bewildered, sat with wide open eyes. Well then, his visitor went on, we have purchased the honesty of Mademoiselle Réanie Toussard, a damsel, from whom Madame Marneffe has no secrets. I understand. But if you shy say so, I will play blindfold, he replied. My mother has told me that that couple deserve the worst torments. The rack is out of date, said the old woman. You answer for the result. Leave it all to me, said the woman. Your vengeance is simmering. She looked at the clock. It was 6. Your avenger is dressing. The fires are lighted at the Rocher de Cancel. The horses are pawing the ground. My irons are getting hotto. I know your Madame Marneffe. By heart, everything is ready. And there are some boluses in the rat trap. I will tell you tomorrow morning. If the mouse is poisoned, I believe she will be. Good evening, my son. Goodbye, madame. Do you know English? Yes. Well, my son, thou shalt be king, that is to say, you shall come into your inheritance, said the dreadful old witch foreseen by Shakespeare, and who seemed to know her Shakespeare. She left Hulot amazed at the door of his study. The consultation is for tomorrow, said she, with the gracious air of a regular client. She saw 2 persons coming, and wished to pass in their eyes a pinchbeck countess. What impudence, thought Hulot, bowing to his pretended client. Baron Montes de Montejanos was a lion, but a lion not accounted for fashionable Paris of the turf, and of the town, admired the ineffable waistcoats of this foreign gentleman, his spotless patent leather boots, his incomparable sticks, his much coveted horses, and the Negro servants who rode the horses, and who were entirely slaves, and most consumedly thrashed. His fortune was well known. He had a credit account up to 700,000 francs in the great banking house of Du Tillet, but he was always seen alone, when he went to first nights, He was in a stall, he frequented no drawing rooms, he had never given his arm to a girl on the streets, his name would not be coupled with that of any pretty woman of the world to pass his time. He played whist at the jockey club, the world was reduced to calumny, or which it thought funnier to laughing at his peculiarities. He went by the name of Combabus. Bixiou Leon de Laura Lausto, Florine Mademoiselle Helles Brystout, and Nathan supping one evening, with the notorious Carabine, with a large party of lions and lionesses, had invented this name, with an excessively burlesque explanation Massol as being on the Council of State, and Claude Vignon, erewhile professor of Greek, had related to the ignorant damsels, the famous anecdote preserved in Roland's ancient history, concerning Combabus, that voluntary Abelard who was placed in charge of the wife of a king of Assyria, Persia, Bactria, Mesopotamia, and other geographical divisions peculiar to old Professor du Bocage, who continued the work of d'Anville, the creator of the East of Antiquity. This nickname, which gave Carabine's guests laughter for a quarter of an hour, gave rise to a series of overfree jests to which the Academy could not award the Montian prize, but among which the name was taken up, to rest thenceforth on the curly mane of the handsome baron, called by Josepha the splendid Brasiliana, as one might say a splendid Cataxantha. Carabine, the loveliest of her tribe, whose delicate beauty and amusing wit had snatched the scepter of the 13th arrondissement from the hands of Mademoiselle Turque, better known by the name of Malaga Mademoiselle Seraphine. Sinnet, this was her real name, was to do Tillet the banker what Josepha Murrah was to the Duc de Hérouville. Now, on the morning of the very day when Madame de Saint Esteve had prophesied success to Victorin, Carabine had said to du Tillet at about 7 o'clock, "If you want to be very nice, you will give me a dinner at the Rocher de Cancale, and bring Combabus. We want to know once for all whether he has a mistress. I bet that he has, and I should like to win." "He is still at the Hotel des Princes. I will call," replied du Tillet. "We will have some fun. Ask all the youngsters, the youngster Bixiou, the youngster Laura, in short, all the clan." At 7:30 that evening, in the handsomest room of the restaurant, where all Europe has dined, a splendid silver service was spread, made on purpose for entertainments, where vanity pays the bill in banknotes. A flood of light fell in ripples on the chaste rims waiters, whom a provincial might have taken for diplomatists, but for their age stood solemnly, as knowing themselves to be overpaid. 5 guests had arrived, and were waiting for 9 more. These were first and foremost Bixiou, still flourishing in 1843, the salt of every intellectual dish, always supplied with fresh wheat. A phenomenon, as rare in Paris as virtue, is Leon de Laura, the greatest living painter of landscape, and the sea, who has this great advantage over all his rivals, that he has never fallen below his first successes. The courtesans could never dispense with these 2 kings of ready wit. No supper, no dinner, was possible without them. Seraphine Sinnet Dike Carabine, as the mistress and titter of the amphitryon, was one of the first to arrive, and the brilliant lighting showed off her shoulders unrivaled in Paris, her throat as round as if turned in a lathe, without a crease, her saucy face and dress of satin, brocade in 2 shades of blue trimmed with Honiton lace enough to have fed a whole village for a month. Pretty Jenny Caddy, not acting that evening, came in a dress of incredible splendor. Her portrait is too well known to need any description. A party is always a Longchamps of evening dress for these ladies, each anxious to win the prize for her millionaire, by thus announcing to her rivals, "This is the price I am worth." A third woman, evidently at the initial stage of her career, gazed almost shamefaced at the luxury of her 2 established and wealthy companions, simply dressed in white cashmere, trimmed with blue. Her head had been dressed with real flowers by a coiffeur of the old-fashioned school, whose awkward hands had unconsciously given the charm of ineptitude to her fair hair, still unaccustomed to any finery. She showed the timiditito use a hackneyed phrase inseparable from a first appearance. She had come from Valognes to find in Paris some use for her distracting youthfulness, her innocence that might have stirred the senses of a dying man, and her beauty worthy to hold its own with any that Normandy has ever supplied to the theaters of the capital. The lines of that unblemished face were the ideal of angelic purity. Her milk-white skin reflected the light like a mirror. The delicate pink in her cheeks might have been laid on with a brush. She was called Cydalise, and as will be seen, she was an important pawn in the game played by Mom Nourrisson to defeat Madame Marneffe. "Your arm is not a match for your name, my child," said Jenny Cadine, to whom Carabine had introduced this masterpiece of 16, having brought her with her. And in fact, Cydalise displayed to public admiration a fine pair of arms smooth and satiny, but red with healthy young blood. What do you want for her? Said Jenny Cadine, in an undertone to Carabine. A fortune. What are you going to do with her? Well, Madame Combebis. And what are you to get for such a job? I guess. A service of plate. I have 3. Diamonds. I am selling them. A green monkey. No, a picture by Raphael. What maggot is that in your brain? Josepha makes me sick with her pictures, said Carabine. I want some better than hers. Dutillet came with the Brazilian, the hero of the feast, the ducty hero evil, followed with Josepha, the singer wore a plain velvet gown. But she had on a necklace worth 120,000 francs pearls, hardly distinguishable from her skin like white camellia petals. She had stuck one scarlet camellia in her black hair patch. The effect was dazzling. And she had amused herself by putting 11 rows of pearls on each arm. As she shook hands with Jenny Cadine, the actress said, "Lend me your mittens." Josepha unclasped them one by one and handed them to her friend on a plate. Their style, said Carabine, quite the Duchess. You have robbed the ocean to dress the nymph, Monsieur le Duc, she added, turning to the little ducty hero. The actress took 2 of the bracelets. She clasped the other 20 on the singer's beautiful arms, which she kissed. Lausto, the literary cadger La Palferine, and Malaga Massal Vauvenet and Theodore, Gaillard, a proprietor of one of the most important political newspapers, completed the party. The ducty hero, polite to everybody as a fine gentleman, knows how to be greeted. The Comte de La Palferine with the particular nod, which, while it does not imply either esteem or intimacy, conveys to all the world we are of the same race, the same blood, equals. And this greeting, the shibboleth of the aristocracy, was invented to be the despair of the upper citizen class. Carabine placed Combebus on her left, and the ducty hero on her right. Sidelize was next to the Brazilian, and beyond her was Bixiou. Malaga sat by the Duke. Oysters appeared at 7 o'clock. At 8, they were drinking iced punch. Everyone is familiar with the bill of fare of such a banquet. By 9 o'clock, they were talking as people talk after 42 bottles of various wines drunk by 14 persons. Dessert was on the table, the odious dessert of the month of April. Of all the party, the only one affected by the heady atmosphere was Sidelize, who was humming a tune none of the party, with the exception of the poor country girl, had lost. Their reason, the drinkers and the women, were the experienced elite of the society that sups. Their wits were bright, their eyes glistened, but with no loss of intelligence, though the talk drifted into satire, anecdote, and gossip conversation, hitherto confined to the inevitable circle of racing horses, hammerings on the bourse, the different occupations of the lions themselves, and the scandals of the town, showed a tendency to break up into intimate tete-a-tete, the dialogues of 2 hearts. And at this stage, at a signal from Carabine to Leon de Laura, Bixiou, La Palferine, and Dutillet love came under discussion. A doctor in good society never talks of medicine. True nobles never speak of their ancestors. Men of genius do not discuss their work, said Josepha. Why should we talk business if I got the opera put off in order to dine here? It was assuredly not to work so. Let us change the subject, dear children. But we are speaking of real love, my beauty, said Malaga, of the love that makes a man fling all to the dogs, father, mother, wife, children, and retire to Clichy. Talk away, then, don't know your, said the singer. The slang words borrowed from the street Arab and spoken by these women may be a poem on their lips, helped by the expression of the eyes and face. What do not I love you, Josepha, said the Duke in a low voice. You perhaps may love me truly, said she in his ear, and she smiled, but I do not love you in the way they describe, with such love as makes the world dark. In the absence of the man beloved, you are delightful to me, useful but not indispensable. And if you were to throw me over tomorrow, I could have 3 dukes for one. Is true love to be found in Paris? Asked Leon de Laura. Men have not even time to make a fortune. How can they give themselves over to true love, which swamps a man as water melts sugar? A man must be enormously rich to indulge in it, for love annihilates him. For instance, like our Brazilian friend over there, as I said long ago, extremes defeat themselves. A true lover is like an eunuch. Women have ceased to exist for him. He is mystical. He is like the true Christian, an anchorite of the desert sea, our noble Brazilian. Everyone at table looked at Henry Montes de Montejanos, who was shy at finding every eye centered on him. He has been feeding there for an hour, without discovering any more than an ox at pasture, that he is sitting next to, I will not say in such company, the loveless but the freshest woman in all Paris. Everything is fresh here, even the fishet is what the house is famous for, said Carabine. Baron Montes looked good-naturedly at the painter and said, Very good, I drink to your very good health, and bowing to Leon de Laura, he lifted his glass of port wine, and drank it with much dignity. Are you then truly in love? Asked Malaga of her neighbor, thus interpreting his toast. The Brazilian refilled his glass, bowed to Carabine, and drank again. To the lady's health, then said the courtesan, in such a droll tone, that Laura du Tillet and Bixiou burst out laughing. The Brazilian sat like a bronze statue. This impassibility provoked Carabine. She knew perfectly well that Montes was devoted to Madame Marneffe, but she had not expected this dogged fidelity, this obstinate silence of conviction. A woman is as often gauged by the attitude of her lover as a man is judged from the tone of his mistress. The Baron was proud of his attachment to Valerie, and of hers to him. His smile had to these experienced connoisseurs a touch of irony. He was really grand to look upon, wine had not flushed him, and his eyes, with their peculiar luster, as of tarnished gold, kept the secrets of his soul. Even Carabine said to herself, What a woman she must be, how she has sealed up that heart. He is a rock, said Bixiou, in an undertone, imagining that the whole thing was a practical joke, and never suspecting the importance to Carabine of reducing this fortress. While this conversation, apparently so frivolous, was going on at Carabine's right, the discussion of love was continued on her left between the Duc de Lausto, Josepha Jenny-Cadine, and Massol. They were wondering whether such rare phenomena were the result of passion obstinacy or affection. Josepha, bored to death by it all, tried to change the subject. You are talking of what you know nothing about. Is there a man among you who ever loved a woman beneath Heimnuff, to squander his fortune and his children's, to sacrifice his future, and blight his past, to risk going to the hulks, for robbing the government, to kill an uncle and a brother, to let his eye be so effectually blinded that he did not even perceive that it was done, to hinder his seeing the abyss into which, as a crowning jest, he was being driven? Du Tillet has a cash-box under his left breast. Leon de Laura has his wit. Bixiou would laugh at himself for a fool if he loved anyone but himself. Massol has a minister's portfolio in the place of a heart. Lausto can have nothing but viscera, since he could endure to be thrown over by Madame de Baudray. Monsieur le Duc is too rich to prove his love by his ruin. Vauvenet is not in a tie. Do not regard a billbroker as one of the human race, and you have never loved, nor I, nor Jenny Cadine, nor Malaga. For my part, I never, but once even saw the phenomenon I have described. It was, and she turned to Jenny Cadine, that poor Baron Hulot, whom I am going to advertise for like a lost dog, for I want to find him. Oh ho, said Carabine to herself, and looking keenly at Josepha, then Madame Nourrisson has 2 pictures by Raphael, since Josepha is playing my hand. Poor fellow, said Vauvenet, he was a great man, magnificent. And what a figure, what a style, the air of Francis Roman, one what a volcano, and how full of ingenious ways of getting money. He must be looking for it now wherever he is, and I make no doubt he extracts it even from the walls built of bones that you may see in the suburbs of Paris near the city gates. And all that, said Bixiou, for that little Madame Marneffe, there is a precious hussy for you. She is just going to marry my friend Crevel, said Du Tillet. And she is madly in love with my friend Steinbach, Leon de Laura put in. These 3 phrases were like so many pistol shots fired point blank at Montes. He turned white, and the shock was so painful that he rose with difficulty. You are a set of blackguards, cried he. You have no right to speak the name of an honest woman in the same breath with those fallen creatures above, all not to make it a mark for your slander. He was interrupted by unanimous bravos and applause. Bixiou, Leon de Laura, Vauvenet, Du Tillet, and Massol set the example, and there was a chorus. Hurrah for the emperor, said Bixiou. Crown him, cried Vauvenet. 3 groans for such a good dog. Hurrah for Brazil, cried Laust. So my copper-colored baron, it is our Valerie that you love, and you are not disgusted, said Leon de Laura. His remark is not parliamentary, but it is grand, observed Massol. But my most delightful customer, said Du Tillet, you were recommended to me, I am your banker. Your innocence reflects on my credit. Yes, tell me you are a reasonable creature, said the Brazilian to the banker. Thanks on behalf of the company, said Bixiou with a bow. Tell me the real facts. Montes went on, heedless of Bixio's interjection. Well then, replied Du Tillet, I have the honor to tell you that I am asked to the Crevel wedding. Aha, Combebus holds a brief for Madame Marneffe, said Josepha, rising solemnly. She went round to Monty's with a tragic look, patted him kindly on the head, looked at him for a moment with comical admiration, and nodded sagely. Hulot was the first instance of love through fire and water, said she. This is the second, but it ought not to count as it comes from the tropics. Monty's had dropped into his chair again, when Josepha gently touched his forehead, and looked at Du Tillet as he said, "If I am the victim of a Paris jest, if you only wanted to get at my secret." And he sent a flashing look round the table, embracing all the guests, in a flaming glance that blazed with the sun of Brazil. "I beg of you, as a favor to tell me, so," he went on in a tone of almost childlike entreaty, "but do not vilify the woman I love." "Nay, indeed," said Carabine in a low voice. "But if on the contrary, you are shamefully betrayed, cheated, tricked by Valerie, if I should give you the proof in an hour in my own house, what then?" "I cannot tell you before all these agos," said the Brazilian. Carabine understood him to say maggots, baboons. "Well, well, say no more," she replied, smiling. "Do not make yourself a laughingstock, for all the wittiest men in Paris come to my house. We will talk it over." Monty's was crushed proofs, he stammered, "consider." "Only too many," replied Carabine, "and if the mere suspicion hits you so hard, I fear for your reason. Is this creature obstinate, I ask you? He is worse than the late lamented King of Holland, I say, Lausto. Bixu Massal, all the crew of you, are you not invited to breakfast with Madame Marneffe the day after tomorrow?" said Leon de Laura. "Yes," said Du Tillet, "I have the honor of assuring you, Baron, that if you had by any chance thought of marrying Madame Marneffe, you are thrown out like a bill in Parliament, beaten by a blackball called Crevel. My friend, my old comrade Crevel, has 80,000 francs a year. And you, I suppose, did not show such a good hand, for if you had, you, I imagine, would have been preferred." Monty's listened with a half-absent, half-smiling expression, which struck them all with terror. At this moment, the head-waiter came to whisper to Carabine that a lady, a relation of hers, was in the drawing-room, and wished to speak to her. Carabine rose, and went out to find Madame Nourrisson, decently veiled with black lace. "Well, child, am I to go to your house? Has he taken the hook?" "Yes, mother, and the pistol is so fully loaded that my only fear is that it will burst," said Carabine. About an hour later, Monty's Sidelize and Carabine, returning from the Rocher de Cancale, entered Carabine's little sitting-room in the Rue St. George's. Madame Nourrisson was sitting in an armchair by the fire. "Here is my worthy old aunt," said Carabine. "Yes, child, I came in person to fetch my little allowance. You would have forgotten me, though you are kind-hearted. And I have some bills to pay tomorrow, buying and selling clothes. I am always short of cash. Who is this at your heels? The gentleman looks very much put out about something." The dreadful Madame Nourrisson at this moment, so completely disguised as to look like a respectable old body, rose to embrace Carabine, one of the 100 and odd courtesans she had launched on their horrible career of vice. "He is an Othello who is not to be taken, in whom I have the honor of introducing to you Monsieur le Baron Montes de Montejanos. Oh, I have heard him talked about, and know his name. You are nicknamed Combabus, because you love but one woman, and in Paris that is the same as loving no one at all. And is it by chance the object of your affections who is fretting you, Madame Marneffe? Crevel's woman, I tell you what, my dear sir, you may bless your stars instead of cursing them. She is a good-for-nothing baggage, is that little woman. I know her tricks." "Get along," said Carabine, into whose hand Madame Nourrisson had slipped a note, while embracing her. "You do not know your Brazilians, they are wrong-headed creatures that insist on being impaled through the heart. The more jealous, they are the more jealous they want to be. Monsieur talks of dealing death all round, but he will kill nobody. Because he is in love, however, I have brought him here to give him the proofs of his discomfiture, which I have got from that little Steinbach." Monty's was drunk. He listened, as if the women were talking about somebody else. Carabine went to take off her velvet wrap, and read a facsimile of a note as follows. "Dear Pussy dines with Popinot this evening, and will come to fetch me from the opera at 11. I shall go out at about 5:30, and count on finding you at our Paradise order. Dinner to be sent in from the Maison d'Or dress, so as to be able to take me to the opera. We shall have 4 hours to ourselves. Return this note to me, not that your Valerie doubts you. I would give you my life, my fortune, and my honor, but I am afraid of the tricks of chance. Here, Baron, this is the note sent to Count Steinbach this morning. Read the address. The original document is burnt." Montes turned the note over and over, recognized the writing, and was struck by a rational idea, which is sufficient evidence of the disorder of his brain. And pray, said he, looking at Carabine, what object have you in torturing my heart? For you must have paid very dear for the privilege of having the note in your possession long enough to get it lithographed. Foolish man, said Carabine at a nod from Madame Nourrisson, don't you see that poor child Cytalicia girl of 16, who has been pining for you these 3 months, till she has lost her appetite for food or drink, and who is heartbroken because you have never even glanced at her? Cytalice put her handkerchief to her eyes with an appearance of emotion. She is furious, Carabine went on, though she looks as if butter would not melt in her mouth, furious to see the man she adores duped by a villainous hussy. She would kill Valerie. Oh, as for that, said the Brazilian, that is my business. What killing, said old Nourrisson. No, my son, we don't do that here nowadays. Oh, said Montes, I am not a native of this country. I live in a parish where I can laugh at your laws, and if you give me proof. Well, that note is that nothing. No, said the Brazilian, I do not believe in the writing. I must see for myself. See, cried Carabine, taking the hint at once from a gesture of her supposed aunt. You shall see, my dear tiger, all you wish to see on one condition. And that is, look at Cytalice. At a wink from Madame Nourrisson, Cytalice cast a tender look at the bear. Will you be good to her? Will you make her a home? Asked Carabine. A girl of such beauty is well worth a house and a carriage. It would be a monstrous shame to leave her to walk the streets, and besides, is in debt. How much do you owe? Asked Carabine, nipping Cytalice's arm. She is worth all she can get, said the old woman. The point is that she can find a buyer. Listen, cried Montes, fully aware at last of this masterpiece of womankind. You will show me Valerie. And Count Steinbock, certainly, said Madame Nourrisson. For the past 10 minutes, the old woman had been watching the Brazilian. She saw that he was an instrument tuned up to the murderous pitch she needed, and above all so effectually blinded that he would never heed who had led him onto it, and she spoke. Cytalice, my Brazilian jewel, is my niece, so her concerns are partly mine. All this catastrophe will be the work of a few minutes for a friend of mine. Let's the furnished room to Count Steinbock, where Valerie is at this moment, taking coffee, a queer sort of coffee. But she calls it her coffee, so let us understand each other. Brazil, I like Brazil. It is a hot country. What is to become of my niece? You old ostrich, said Montes, the plumes in the woman's bonnet catching his eye. You interrupted me. If you show Maif, I see Valerie and that artist together. As you would wish to be, said Carabine, that is understood. Then I will take this girl and carry her away. Where? Asked Carabine. To Brazil, replied the Baron. I will make her my wife. My uncle left me 10 leagues square of entailed estate. That is how I still have that house and home. I have 100 Negroes, nothing but Negroes and Negresses and Negro brats, all bought by my uncle. Nephew to a nigger driver, said Carabine, with a grimace that needs some consideration. Cytalized child, are you fond of the blacks? Pooh, Carabine, no nonsense, said the old woman. The deuce is in it, monsieur, and I are doing business. If I take up another Frenchwoman, I mean to have her to myself. The Brazilian went on. I warn you, mademoiselle, I am king there, and not a constitutional king. I am czar, my subjects are mine by purchase, and no one can escape from my kingdom, which is 100 leagues from any human settlement, hemmed in by savages on the interior, and divided from the sea by a wilderness as wide as France. I should prefer a garret here. So thought I, said Montes, since I sold all my land and possessions at Rio, to come back to Madame Marneffe. A man does not make such a voyage for nothing, remarked Madame Nourrisson. You have a right to look for love for your own sake, particularly being so good-looking. Oh, he is very handsome, said she to Carabine. Very handsome, handsomer than the Postillon de Longjumeau, replied the courtesan. Cytalice took the Brazilian's hand, but he released it as politely as he could. I came back for Madame Marneffe. The man went on where he had left off, but you do not know why I was 3 years thinking about it. No, savage, said Carabine. Well, she had so repeatedly told me that she longed to live with me alone in a desert. Oh ho, he is not a savage after all, cried Carabine, with a shout of laughter. He is of the highly civilized tribe of flats. She had told me this so often, Montes went on regardless of the courtesan's mockery, that I had a lovely house fitted up in the heart of that vast estate. I came back to France to fetch Valerie, and the first evening I saw her. Saw her is very proper, said Carabine, I will remember it. She told me to wait till that wretched Marneffe was dead, And I agreed and forgave her for having admitted the attentions of Hulot. Whether the devil had her in hand, I don't know. But from that instant, that woman has humored my every whim, complied with all my demands. Never for one moment has she given me cause to suspect her. That is supremely clever, said Carabine to Madame Nourrisson, who nodded in sign of assent. My faith in that woman, said Montes, and he shed a tear, was a match for my love just now. I was ready to fight everybody at table. So I saw, said Carabine. And if I am cheated, if she is going to be married, if she is at this moment in Steinbach's arms, she deserves 1,000 deaths. I will kill her, as I would smash a fly. And how about the gendarmes, my son, said Madame Nourrisson, with a smile that made your flesh creep. And the police agents, and the judges, and the assizes, and all the set out, added Carabine. You are bragging, my dear fellow, said the old woman, who wanted to know all the Brazilian schemes of vengeance. I will kill her, he calmly repeated. You called me a savage, do you imagine that I am fool enough to go like a Frenchman, and buy poison at the chemist's shop during the time, while we were driving her? I thought out my means of revenge. If you should prove to be right as concerns Valerie, one of my Negroes has the most deadly of animal poisons, and incurable. Anywhere but in Brazil, I will administer it to Cytalize, who will give it to me. Then by the time when death is a certainty to Crevel, and his wife, I shall be beyond the Azores with your cousin, who will be cured. And I will marry her. We have our own little tricks, we savages, Cytalize said, he looking at the country girl. Is the animal I need? How much does she owe? 100,000 francs, said Cytalize. She says little but to the purpose, said Carabine, in a low tone to Madame Nourrisson. I am going mad, cried the Brazilian in a husky voice, dropping onto a sofa. I shall die of this. But I must see, for it is impossible. A lithographed note. What is to assure me that it is not a forgery? Baron Hulot was in love with Valerie, said he, recalling Josepha's harangue. Nay, the proof that he did not love is that she is still alive. I will not leave her living for anybody else, if she is not wholly mine. Montes was terrible to behold. He bellowed, he stormed, he broke everything he touched. Rosewood was as brittle as glass. How he destroys things, said Carabine, looking at the old woman. My good boy, said she, giving the Brazilian a little slap. Roland, the furious, is very fine in a poem, but in a drawing room he is prosaic and expensive. My son, said old Nourrisson, rising to stand in front of the crestfallen baron, I am of your way of thinking when you love in that way, and are joined, till death does you part. Life must answer for love. The one who first goes carries everything away. It is a general wreck. You command my esteem, my admiration, my consent, especially for your inoculation, which will make me a friend of the Negro. But you love her, you will hark back. I, if she is so infamous, I. Well, come now, you are talking too much. It strikes me a man who means to be avenged, and who says he has the ways and means of a savage, doesn't do that. If you want to see your object in her paradise, you must take Cytalize and walk straight in with her on your arm, as if the servant had made a mistake. But no scandal if you mean to be revenged. You must eat the leek, seem to be in despair, and allow her to bully you. Do you see, said Madame Nourrisson, finding the Brazilian quite amazed by so subtle a scheme. All right, old ostrich, he replied, come along, I understand. Goodbye, little one, said the old woman to Carabine. She signed to Cytalize to go on with Montes, and remained a minute with Carabine. Now, child, I have but one fear, and that is that he will strangle her. I should be in a very tight place. We must do everything gently. I believe you have won your picture by Raphael. But they tell me it is only a Mignard. Never mind, it is much prettier. All the Raphaels are gone black, I am told, whereas this one is as bright as a Girardot. All I want is to crow over Josepha, and it is all the same to me whether I have a Mignard or a Raphael. That thief had on such pearls this evening you would sell your soul for them. Cytalize, Montes, and Madame Nourrisson got into a hackney coach that was waiting at the door. Madame Nourrisson whispered to the driver the address of a house in the same block as the Italian Opera House, which they could have reached in 5 or 6 minutes from the Rue St. George's. But Madame Nourrisson desired the man to drive along the Rue Le Pelletier, and to go very slowly so as to be able to examine the carriages in waiting. Brazilian, said the old woman, look out for your angel's carriage and servants. The Baron pointed out Valerie's carriage as they passed it. She has told them to come for her at 10 o'clock, and she is gone in a cab to the house, where she visits Count Steinbach. She has dined there, and will come to the opera in half an hour. It is well contrived, said Madame Nourrisson. Thus you see how she has kept you so long in the dark. The Brazilian made no reply. He had become the tiger, and had recovered the imperturbable cool ferocity that had been so striking at dinner, he was as calm as a bankrupt the day after he has stopped payment. At the door of the house stood a hackney coach with 2 horses of the kind known as a compagnie generale from the company that runs them. "Stay here in the box," said the old woman to Montes. "This is not an open house like a tavern. I will send for you." The paradise of Madame Marneffe and Wenceslas was not at all like that of Crevel, who, finding it useless now, had just sold his to the Comte Maxime de Trailles. This paradise, the paradise of all comers, consisted of a room on the 4th floor opening to the landing. In a house close to the Italian Opera, on each floor of this house there was a room which had originally served as the kitchen to the apartments on that floor, but the house having become a sort of inn, let out for clandestine love affairs, at an exorbitant price, the owner, the real Madame Nourrisson, an old clothes buyer in the Rue Neuve Saint Marc, had wisely appreciated the great value of these kitchens and had turned them into a sort of dining rooms. Each of these rooms, built between thick party walls and with windows to the street, was entirely shut in by very thick double doors on the landing. Thus the most important secrets could be discussed over a dinner, with no risk of being overheard. For greater security, the windows had shutters. Inside and out, these rooms, in consequence of this peculiarity, were let for 1,200 francs a month. The whole house, full of such paradises and mysteries, was rented by Madame Nourrisson, the first, for 28,000 francs of clear profit, after paying her housekeeper Madame Nourrisson, the second, for she did not manage it herself. The paradise let to Count Steinbach had been hung with chintz. The cold, hard floor of common tiles, reddened with encaustic, was not felt through a soft, thick carpet. The furniture consisted of 2 pretty chairs and a bed in an alcove, just now half hidden by a table, loaded with the remains of an elegant dinner, while 2 bottles with long necks and an empty champagne bottle in ice strewed the field of Bacchus cultivated by Venus. There were also the property, no doubt, of Valeria, a low easy-chair, and a man's smoking chair, and a pretty toilet chest of drawers in rosewood. The mirror, handsomely framed à la Pompadour, a lamp hanging from the ceiling, gave a subdued light increased by wax candles on the table and on the chimney shelf. This sketch will suffice to give an idea urbi et orbi of clandestine passion in the squalid style, stamped on it in Paris in 1840, how far, alas, from the adulterous love, symbolized by Vulcan's nets 3,000 years ago. When Montes and Cytalize came upstairs, Valerie, standing before the fire, where a log was blazing, was allowing Wenceslas to lace her stays. This is a moment when a woman who is neither too fat nor too thin, but like Valerie, elegant and slender, displays divine beauty, the rosy skin mostly soft, invites the sleepiest eye. The lines of her figure, so little hidden, are so charmingly outlined by the white pleats of the shift and the support of the stays, that she is irresistible, like everything that must be parted from. With a happy face smiling at the glass, a foot impatiently marking time, a hand put up to restore order among the tumbled curls, and eyes expressive of gratitude, with the glow of satisfaction, which like a sunset warms the least details of the countenance of everything, makes such a moment a mine of memories. Any man who dares look back on the early errors of his life may perhaps recall some such reminiscences, and understand, though not excuse, the follies of Hulot and Crevel. Women are so well aware of their power at such a moment that they find in it what may be called the aftermath of the meeting. Come, after 2 years' practice, you do not yet know how to lace a woman's stays. You are too much a Pole there. It is 10 o'clock, my Wenceslas, said Valerie, laughing at him. At this very moment, a mischievous waiting woman, by inserting a knife, pushed up the hook of the double doors that formed the whole security of Adam and Eve. She hastily pulled the door open, for the servants of these dens have little time to waste, and discovered one of the bewitching tableaux de genre, which Gavarni has so often shown at the salon. "In here, madame," said the girl, and Cytalize went in, followed by Montes. "But there is some one here, excuse me, madame," said the country girl in alarm. "What, why, it is Valerie," cried Montes, violently slamming the door. Madame Marneffe, too genuinely agitated to dissemble her feelings, dropped onto the chair by the fireplace. 2 tears rose to her eyes, and at once dried away. She looked at Montes, saw the girl, and burst into a cackle of forced laughter. The dignity of the insulted woman redeemed the scantiness of her attire. She walked close up to the Brazilian and looked at him so defiantly that her eyes glittered like knives. "So that," said she, standing face to face with the Baron and pointing to Cytalice, "that is the other side of your fidelity, you who have made me promises that might convert a disbeliever in love. You for whom I have done so much, have even committed crimes. You are right, monsieur. I am not to compare with a child of her age and of such beauty. I know what you are going to say, she went on, looking at Wenceslas, whose undress was proof too clear to be denied. This is my concern. If I could love you after such gross treachery, for you have spied upon me, you have paid for every step up these stairs, paid the mistress of the house and the servant, perhaps even Rienia, noble deed. If I had any remnant of affection for such a mean wretch, I could give him reasons that would renew his passion, but I leave you, monsieur, to your doubts, which will become remorse. Wenceslas, my gown. She took her dress and put it on, looked at herself in the glass, and finished dressing, without heeding the Baron, as calmly as if she had been alone in the room. Wenceslas, are you ready? Go first. She had been watching Montes in the glass and out of the corner of her eye, and fancied she could see in his pallor an indication of the weakness which delivers a strong man over to a woman's fascinations. She now took his hand, going so close to him that he could not help inhaling the terrible perfumes which men love and by which they intoxicate themselves. Then, feeling his pulses beat high, she looked at him reproachfully. You have my full permission to go and tell your history to Monsieur Crevel. He will never believe you. I have a perfect right to marry him, and he becomes my husband the day after tomorrow. I shall make him very happy. Goodbye. Try to forget me. Oh, Valerie, cried Henry Montes, clasping her in his arms, that is impossible. Come to Brazil. Valerie looked in his face and saw him her slave. Well, if you still love me, Henry, 2 years hence, I will be your wife, but your expression at this moment strikes me as very suspicious. I swear to you that they made me drink that false friends threw this girl on my hands, and that the whole thing is the outcome of chance, said Montes. Then I am to forgive you, she asked with a smile. But you will marry all the same, asked the Baron, in an agony of jealousy. 80,000 francs a year, said she with almost comical enthusiasm, and Crevel loves me so much that he will die of it. Ah, I understand, said Montes. Well then, in a few days, we will come to an understanding, said she. And she departed triumphant. I have no scruples, thought the Baron, standing transfixed for a few minutes. What that woman believes, she can make use of his passion to be quit of that dolt, as she counted on Marneffe's decease, shall be the instrument of divine wrath. 2 days later, those of du Tillet's guests who had demolished Madame Marneffe tooth and nail were seated round her table an hour after she has shed her skin, and changed her name for the illustrious name of a Paris mayor. This verbal treason is one of the commonest forms of Parisian levity. Valerie had had the satisfaction of seeing the Brazilian in the church for Crevel, now so entirely, the husband had invited him out of bravado, and the Baron's presence at the breakfast astonished, no, one. All these men of wit and of the world were familiar with the meanness of passion, the compromises of pleasure. Steinbach's deep melancholy, he was beginning to despise the woman whom he had adored as an angel was considered to be in excellent taste. The Pole, thus seemed to convey that all was at an end between Valerie and himself. Lisbeth came to embrace her dear Madame Crevel, and to excuse herself for not staying to the breakfast on the score of Adeline's sad state of health. Be quite easy, said she to Valerie, they will call on you, and you will call on them. Simply hearing the words 200,000 francs has brought the Baroness to death's door. Oh, you have them all hard and fast by that tale, but you must tell it to me. Within a month of her marriage, Valerie was at her 10th quarrel with Steinbach. He insisted on explanations, as to Henry Montes, reminding her of the words spoken in their paradise, and not content with speaking to her in terms of scorn. He watched her so closely that she never had a moment of liberty, so much was she fettered by his jealousy on one side and Crevel's devotion on the other. Bereft now of Lisbeth, whose advice had always been so valuable, she flew into such a rage as to reproach Wenceslas for the money she had lent him. This so effectually roused Steinbach's pride that he came no more to the Crevel's house. So Valerie had gained her point, which was to be rid of him for a time and enjoy some freedom. She waited till Crevel should make a little journey into the country to see Comte Popinot, with a view to arranging for her introduction to the Countess, and was then able to make an appointment to meet the Baron, whom she wanted to have at her command for a whole day, to give him those reasons which were to make him love her more than ever. On the morning of that day, Rieni, who estimated the magnitude of her crime by that of the bribe she received, tried to warn her mistress, in whom she naturally took more interest than in strangers still, as she had been threatened with madness, and ending her days in the Salpêtrière in case of indiscretion, she was cautious. Madame, you are so well off now, said she. Why take on again with that Brazilian? I do not trust him at all. You are very right, Riani, and I mean to be rid of him. Oh, madame, I am glad to hear it. He frightens me, does that Bigmore. I believe him to be capable of anything. Silly child, you have more reason to be afraid for him when he is with me. At this moment Lisbeth came in. My dear little pet Nanny, what an age since we met, cried Valerie. I am so unhappy, Crevel bores me to death, and Wenceslas is gone or quarreled. I know, said Lisbeth, and that is what brings me here. Victorin met him at about 5 in the afternoon, going into an eating house at 25 sous. And he brought him home hungry by working on his feelings to the Rue Loyal Grand Hortense, seeing Wenceslas lean and ill, and badly dressed, held out her hand. This is how you throw me over. Monsieur Henry, madame, the manservant announced in a low voice to Valerie. Leave me now, Lisbeth, I will explain it all tomorrow. But as will be seen, Valerie was ere long not in a state to explain anything to anybody. Towards the end of May, Baron Hulot's pension was released by Victorin's regular payment to Baron Nucingen. As everybody knows, pensions are paid half-yearly, and only on the presentation of a certificate that the recipient is alive. And as Hulot's residence was unknown, the arrears unpaid on Vauvenet's demand remained to his credit in the treasury. Vauvenet now signed his renunciation of any further claims, and it was still indispensable to find the pensioner before the arrears could be drawn. Thanks to Bianchin's care, the Baroness had recovered her health, and to this Josepha's good heart had contributed by a letter of which the orthography betrayed the collaboration of the Duc de Hérouville. This was what the singer wrote to the Baroness after 20 days of anxious search. Madame la Baronne, Monsieur Hulot was living 2 months since in the Rue des Bernardins with Elodie Chardin, a lace mender for whom he had left Mademoiselle Bijou, but he went away without a word, leaving everything behind him, and no one knows where he is. When I am not without hope, however, and I have put a man on this track who believes he has already seen him in the boulevard. Bourdon. The poor Jewess means to keep the promise she made to the Christian. Will the angel pray for the devil that must sometimes happen in heaven? I remain with the deepest respect always your humble servant, Josepha Murra. The lawyer Mater Hulot d'Hervey, hearing no more of the dreadful Madame Nourrisson, seeing his father-in-law married, having brought back his brother-in-law to the family fold, suffering from no importunity on the part of his new stepmother, and seeing his mother's health improve daily, gave himself up to his political and judicial duties, swept along by the tide of Paris life, in which the hours count for days. One night towards the end of the session, having occasion to write up a report to the Chamber of Deputies, he was obliged to sit at work till late at night. He had gone into his study at 9 o'clock, and while waiting till the manservant should bring in the candles with green shades, his thoughts turned to his father. He was blaming himself for leaving the inquiry so much to the singer, and had resolved to see Monsieur Chapuzot himself on the morrow, when he saw in the twilight, outside the window, a handsome old head, bald and yellow, with a fringe of white hair. Would you please to give orders, sir, that a poor hermit is to be admitted, just come from the desert, and who is instructed to beg for contributions towards rebuilding a holy house. This apparition, which suddenly reminded the lawyer of a prophecy uttered by the terrible Nourrisson, gave him a shock. Let in that old man, said he to the servant. He will poison the place, sir, replied the man. He has on a brown gown, which he has never changed since he left Syria, and he has no shirt. Show him in, repeated the master. The old man came in. Victorin's keen eye examined this so-called pilgrim hermit, and he saw a fine specimen of the Neapolitan friars, whose frocks are akin to the rags of the Lazzaroni, whose sandals are tatters of leather, as the friars are tatters of humanity. The get-up was so perfect that the lawyer, though still on his guard, was vexed with himself for having believed it to be one of Madame Nourrisson's tricks. How much do you want of me? Whatever you feel that you ought to give me. Victorin took a 5-franc piece from a little pile on his table and handed it to the stranger. That is not much on account of 50,000 francs, said the pilgrim of the desert. This speech removed all Victorin's doubts. And has heaven kept its word, he said with a frown. The question is an offense, my son, said the hermit. If you do not choose to pay, till after the funeral you are in your rights. I will return in a week's time. The funeral, cried the lawyer, starting up. The world moves on, said the old man as he withdrew, and the dead move quickly in Paris. When Hulot, who stood looking down, was about to reply, the stalwart old man had vanished. I don't understand one word of all this, said Victorin to himself. But at the end of the week, I will ask him again about my father. If we have not yet found him, where does Madame Nourrissonni's, that was her name, pick up such actors? On the following day, Dr. Bianchon allowed the Baroness to go down into the garden, after examining Lisbeth, who had been obliged to keep to her room for a month, by a slight bronchial attack. The learned doctor, who dared not pronounce a definite opinion on Lisbeth's case, till he had seen some decisive symptoms, went into the garden with Adeline to observe the effect of the fresh air on her nervous trembling after 2 months of seclusion. He was interested and allured by the hope of curing this nervous complaint on seeing the great physician sitting with them, and sparing them a few minutes, the Baroness and her family conversed with him on general subjects. "Your life is a very full, and a very sad one," said Madame Hulot. "I know what it is to spend one's days in seeing poverty and physical suffering." "I know, Madame," replied the doctor, "all the scenes of which charity compels you to be a spectator. But you will get used to it, in time, as we all do. It is the law of existence. The confessor, the magistrate, the lawyer, would find life unendurable if the spirit of the state did not assert itself above the feelings of the individual. Could we live at all? But for that is not the soldier in time of war brought face to face with spectacles even more dreadful than those we see, and every soldier that has been under fire is kind-hearted. We medical men have the pleasure now and again of a successful cure, as you have that of saving a family from the horrors of hunger, depravity, or misery, and of restoring it to social respectability. But what comfort can the magistrate find, the police agent, or the attorney, who spend their lives in investigating the basest schemes of self-interest, the social monster, whose only regret is when it fails, but on whom repentance never dawns? One half of society spends its life in watching the other half. A very old friend of mine is an attorney now retired, who told me that for 15 years past notaries and lawyers have distrusted their clients quite as much as their adversaries. Your son is a pleader. Has he never found himself compromised by the client for whom he held a brief? Very often, said Victorin with a smile. And what is the cause of this deep-seated evil? Asked the Baroness. The decay of religion, said Bianchon, and the preeminence of finance, which is simply solidified selfishness. Money used not to be everything. There were some kinds of superiority that ranked above it, nobility, genius, service done to the state. But nowadays the law takes wealth as the universal standard and regards it as the measure of public capacity. Certain magistrates are ineligible to the chamber. Jacques Rousseau would be ineligible. The perpetual subdivision of a state compels every man to take care of himself from the age of 20. Well then, between the necessity for making a fortune and the depravity of speculation, there is no check or hindrance, for the religious sense is wholly lacking in France, in spite of the laudable endeavors of those who are working for a Catholic revival. And this is the opinion of every man who, like me, studies society at the core. And you have few pleasures, said Hortense. The true physician, Madame, is in love with his science, replied the doctor. He is sustained by that passion as much as by the sense of his usefulness to society. At this very time you see in me a sort of scientific rapture, and many superficial judges would regard me as a man devoid of feeling. I have to announce a discovery tomorrow to the College of Medicine, for I am studying a disease that had disappeared, a mortal disease for which no cure is known in temperate climates, though it is curable. In the West Indies, a malady, known here in the Middle Ages, a noble fight is that of the physician against such a disease. For the last 10 days, I have thought of nothing but these cases. For there are two, a husband and wife. Are they not connections of yours? For you, Madame, are surely Monsieur Crevel's daughter, said he, addressing Celestine. What is my father, your patient? Asked Celestine, living in the Rue Barbet Jowie. Precisely so, said Bianchon. And the disease is inevitably fatal, said Victorin in dismay. I will go to see him, said Celestine, rising. I positively forbid it, Madame Bianchon quietly said. The disease is contagious. But you go there, monsieur, replied the young woman. Do you think that a daughter's duty is less binding than a doctor's? Madame, a physician knows how to protect himself against infection, and the rashness of your devotion proves to me that you would probably be less prudent than Roman one. Celestine, however, got up and went to her room, where she dressed to go out. Monsieur, said Victorin to Bianchon, have you any hope of saving Monsieur and Madame Crevel? I hope, but I do not believe that I may, said Bianchon. The case is to me quite inexplicable. The disease is peculiar to Negroes, and the American tribes whose skin is differently constituted to that of the white races. Now, I can trace no connection with the copper-colored tribes, with Negroes or half-castes in Monsieur or Madame Crevel. And though it is a very interesting disease to us, it is a terrible thing for the sufferers. The poor woman who is said to have been very pretty is punished for her sins, for she is now squalidly hideous if she is still anything at all. She is losing her hair and teeth, her skin is like a leper's. She is a horror to herself, her hands are horrible, covered with greenish pustules, her nails are loose, and the flesh is eaten away by the poisoned humors. And the cause of such a disease? Asked the lawyer. Oh, said the doctor, the cause lies in a form of rapid blood poisoning. It degenerates with terrific rapidity. I hope to act on the blood. I am having it analyzed. And I am now going home to ascertain the result of the labors of my friend Professor Duval, the famous chemist, with a view to trying one of those desperate measures by which we sometimes attempt to defeat death. The hand of God is there, said Adeline, in a voice husky, with emotion, though that woman has brought sorrows on me, which have led me in moments of madness to invoke the vengeance of heaven. I hope God knows. I hope you may succeed, doctor. Victorin felt dizzy. He looked at his mother, his sister, and the physician by turns, quaking, lest they should read his thoughts. He felt himself a murderer. Hortense, for her part, thought God was just. Celestine came back to beg her husband to accompany her. If you insist on going, madame, and you too, monsieur, keep at least a foot between you and the bed of the sufferer. That is the chief precaution. Neither you nor your wife must dream of kissing the dying man. And indeed you ought to go with your wife, Monsieur Hulot, to hinder her from disobeying my injunctions. Adeline and Hortense, when they were left alone, went to sit with Lisbeth. Hortense had such a virulent hatred of Valerie that she could not contain the expression of it. Cousin Lisbeth, she exclaimed, my mother and I are avenged. That venomous snake is herself. Bittench is rotting in her bed. Hortense, at this moment, you are not a Christian. You ought to pray to God to vouchsafe repentance to this wretched woman. What are you talking about? Said Betty, rising from her couch. Are you speaking of Valerie? Yes, replied Adeline. She is past hope, dying of some horrible disease, of which the mere description makes one shudder. Lisbeth's teeth chattered, a cold sweat broke out all over her. The violence of the shock showed how passionate her attachment to Valerie had been. I must go there, said she. But the doctor forbids your going out. I do not care, I must go. Poor Crevel, what a state he must be in, for he loves that woman. He is dying too, replied Countess Steinbach. Ah, all our enemies are in the devil's clutches. In God's hands, my child. Lisbeth, dressed in the famous yellow Indian shawl and her black velvet bonnet, and put on her boots in spite of her relations' remonstrances, she set out, as if driven by some irresistible power. She arrived in the Rue Barbet a few minutes after Monsieur and Madame Hulot, and found 7 physicians there brought by Bianchon to study this unique case. He had just joined them. The physicians assembled in the drawing-room were discussing the disease. Now one and now another went into Valerie's room or Crevel's to take a note, and returned with an opinion based on this rapid study. These princes of science were divided in their opinions. One, who stood alone in his views, considered it a case of poisoning of private revenge, and denied its identity with the disease known in the Middle Ages. 3 others regarded it as a specific deterioration of the blood and the humors. The rest, agreeing with Bianchon, maintained that the blood was poisoned by some hitherto unknown morbid infection. Bianchon produced Professor Duval's analysis of the blood. The remedies to be applied, though absolutely empirical and without hope, depended on the verdict in this medical dilemma. Lisbeth stood as if petrified 3 yards away from the bed, where Valerie lay dying, as she saw a priest from St. Thomas d'Aquin standing by her friend's pillow, and a sister of charity in attendance. Religion could find a soul to save in a mass of rottenness. Which of the 5 senses of man had now only that of sight? The sister of charity, who alone had been found to nurse Valerie, stood apart. Thus the Catholic religion, that divine institution, always actuated by the spirit of self-sacrifice, under its twofold aspect of the spirit, and the flesh, was tending this horrible and atrocious creature, soothing her deathbed, by its infinite benevolence and inexhaustible stores of mercy. The servants, in horror, refused to go into the room of either their master or mistress. They thought only of themselves, and judged their betters as righteously stricken. The smell was so foul that, in spite of open windows and strong perfumes, no one could remain long in Valerie's room. Religion alone kept guard there. How could a woman so clever as Valerie fail to ask herself, To what end these two representatives of the church remained with her? The dying woman had listened to the words of the priest repentance, had risen on her darkened soul, as the devouring malady had consumed her beauty. The fragile Valerie had been less able to resist the inroads of the disease than Crevel. She would be the first to succumb, and indeed had been the first attacked. If I had not been ill myself, I would have come to nurse you, said Lisbeth at last, after a glance at her friend's sunken eyes. I have kept my room this fortnight or 3 weeks. But when I heard of your state from the doctor, I came at once. Poor Lisbeth, you at least love me still, I see, said Valerie. Listen, I have only a day or two left to think, for I cannot say to live, you see. There is nothing left of me, I am a heap of mud. They will not let me see myself in a glass well. It is no more than I deserve. Oh, if I might only win mercy, I would gladly undo all the mischief I have done. Oh, said Lisbeth, if you can talk like that, you are indeed a dead woman. Do not hinder this woman's repentance, leave her in her Christian mind, said the priest. There is nothing left, said Lisbeth in consternation. I cannot recognize her eyes or her mouth, not a feature of her, is there? And her wit has deserted her. Oh, it is awful. You don't know, said Valerie, what death is, what it is to be obliged to think of the morrow of your last day on earth, and of what is to be found in the grave worms for the body and for the soul. What, Lisbeth, I know, there is another life, and I am given over to terrors which prevent my feeling the pangs of my decomposing body. I, who could laugh at a saint, and say, to Crevel, that the vengeance of God took every form of disaster well. I was a true prophet. Do not trifle with sacred things, Lisbeth. If you love me, repent as I do. I said, Lisbeth, I see vengeance wherever I turn in nature. Insects even die to satisfy the craving for revenge when they are attacked. And do not these gentlemen tell you, then, she looked at the priest, that God is revenged, and that his vengeance lasts through all eternity? The priest looked mildly at Lisbeth and said, You, madame, are an atheist. But look what I have come to, said Valerie. And where did you get this gangrene? Asked the old maid, unmoved from her peasant incredulity. I had a letter from Henry, which leaves me in no doubt as to my fate. He has murdered me, and just when I meant to live honestly, die an object of disgust. Lisbeth, give up all notions of revenge. Be kind to that family, to whom I have left by my will everything I can dispose of. Go, child, though you are the only creature who at this hour does not avoid me with horror. Go, I beseech you, and leave me. I have only time to make my peace with God. She is wandering in her wits, said Lisbeth to herself as she left the room. The strongest affection known, that of a woman for a woman, had not such heroic constancy. As the church, Lisbeth, stifled by the miasma, went away, she found the physicians still in consultation, but Bianchin's opinion carried the day, and the only question now was how to try the remedies. At any rate, we shall have a splendid post-mortem, said one of his opponents, and there will be 2 cases to enable us to make comparisons. Lisbeth went in again with Bianchin, who went up to the sick woman, without seeming aware of the malodorous atmosphere. Madame, said he, we intend to try a powerful remedy which may save you. And if you save my life, said she, shall I be as good-looking as ever? Possibly, said the judicious physician. I know you're possibly, said Valerie. I shall look like a woman who has fallen into the fire. No, leave me to the church. I can please no one now, but God. I will try to be reconciled to him. And that will be my last flirtation. Yes, I must try to come round God. That is my poor Valerie's last jest, that is all herself, said Lisbeth in tears. Lisbeth thought it her duty to go into Crevel's room, where she found Victorin and his wife sitting about a yard away from the stricken man's bed. Lisbeth, said he, they will not tell me what state my wife is in. You have just seen her. How is she? She is better, she says she is saved, replied Lisbeth, allowing herself this play on the word to soothe Crevel's mind. That is well, said the mayor. I feared lest I had been the cause of her illness. A man is not a traveler in perfumery for nothing. I had blamed myself. If I should lose her, what would become of me? On my honor, my children, I worship that woman. He sat up in bed and tried to assume his favorite position. Oh, Papa, cried Celestine, if only you could be well again, I would make friends with my stepmother. I make a vow. Poor little Celestine, said Crevel, come and kiss me. Victorin held back his wife, who was rushing forward. You do not know, perhaps, said the lawyer gently, that your disease is contagious, monsieur. To be sure, replied Crevel, and the doctors are quite proud of having rediscovered in me some long-lost plague of the Middle Ages, which the faculty has had cried like lost property. It is very funny. Papa said, Celestine, be brave, and you will get the better of this disease. Be quite easy, my children. Death thinks twice of it before carrying off a mayor of Paris, said he with monstrous composure. And if after all my district is so unfortunate as to lose a man, it has twice honored with its suffrage. You see what a flow of words I have. Well, I shall know how to pack up and go. I have been a commercial traveler. I am experienced in such matters. All my children, I am a man of strong mind. Papa promised me to admit the church. Never, replied Crevel. What is to be said? I drank the milk of revolution. I have not Baron Halbach's wit, but I have his strength of mind. I am more regents than ever, more musketeer Abbe Dubois and Marechal de Richelieu. By the holy poker, my wife, who is wandering in her head, has just sent me a man in a gaunteau, me, the admirer of Beranger, the friend of Lisette, the son of Voltaire, and Rousseau the doctor, to feel my pulse, as it were, and see if sickness had subdued me. You saw Monsieur L. Abbe, said he. Well, I imitated the great Montesquieu. Yes, I looked at the doctor, see, like this. And he turned to show three-quarters face like his portrait, and extended his hand authoritatively, and I said, the slave was here. He showed his order, but he nothing gained. His order is a pretty jest, showing that even in death Monsieur le Président de Montesquieu preserved his elegant wit, for they had sent him a Jesuit. I admire that passage. I cannot say of his life, but of his death the passage. An author joke the passage from life to death passage Montesquieu. Victorin gazed sadly at his father-in-law, wondering whether folly and vanity were not forces on a par with true greatness of soul. The causes that act on the springs of the soul seem to be quite independent of the results. Can it be that the fortitude which upholds a great criminal is the same as that which a championess so proudly walks to the scaffold? By the end of the week Madame Crevel was buried after dreadful sufferings, and Crevel followed her within 2 days. Thus the marriage contract was annulled. Crevel was heir to Valerie. On the very day after the funeral the friar called again on the lawyer, who received him in perfect silence. The monk held out his hand without a word. And without a word Victorin Hulot gave him 80,000 franc notes taken from a sum of money found in Crevel's desk. Young Madame Hulot inherited the estate of Presles and 30,000 francs a year. Madame Crevel had bequeathed a sum of 300,000 francs to Baron Hulot. Her scrofulous boy Stanislas was to inherit at his majority the Hotel Crevel and 80,000 francs. Among the many noble associations founded in Paris by Catholic charity, there is one originated by Madame de la Chanterie for promoting civil and religious marriages between persons who have formed a voluntary but illicit union, legislators, who draw large revenues from the registration fees and the bourgeois dynasty, which benefits by the notary's profits, affect to overlook the fact that 3/4 of the poorer class cannot afford 15 francs for the marriage contract. The pleaders, a sufficiently vilified body, gratuitously defend the cases of the indigent, while the notaries have not as yet agreed to charge nothing for the marriage contract of the poor. As to the revenue collectors, the whole machinery of government would have to be dislocated to induce the authorities to relax their demands. The registrar's office is deaf and dumb. Then the church, too, receives a duty on marriages in France. The church depends largely on such revenues. Even in the house of God, it traffics in chairs and kneeling stools in a way that offends foreigners, though it cannot have forgotten the anger of the Savior, who drove the money changers out of the temple. If the church is so loath to relinquish its dues, it must be supposed that these dues, known as vestry dues, are one of its sources of maintenance. And then the fault of the church is the fault of the state. The cooperation of these conditions at a time when charity is too greatly concerned with the Negroes and the petty offenders discharged from prison to trouble itself about honest folks in difficulties, results in the existence of a number of decent couples who have never been legally married for lack of 30 francs, the lowest figure for which the notary, the registrar, the mayor, and the church will unite 2 citizens of Paris. Madame de la Chanterie's fund, founded to restore poor households to their religious and legal status, hunts up such couples, and with all the more success because it helps them in their poverty before attacking their unlawful union. As soon as Madame Hulot had recovered, she returned to her occupations, and then it was that the admirable Madame de la Chanterie came to beg that Adeline would add the legalization of these voluntary unions to the other good works of which she was the instrument. One of the Baroness' first efforts in this cause was made in the ominous-looking district, formerly known as La Petite Pologne, Little Poland, bounded by the Rue du Rocher, Rue de la Pépinière, and Rue de Miromnil. There exists there a sort of offshoot of the Faubourg Saint-Marceau, To give an idea of this part of the town, it is enough to say that the landlords of some of the houses tenanted by working men, without work by dangerous characters, and by the very poor employed in unhealthy toil, dare not demand their rents, and can find no bailiffs bold enough to evict insolvent lodgers at the present time speculating builders, who are fast changing the aspect of this corner of Paris, and covering the waste ground lying between the Rue d'Amsterdam and the Rue Faubourg du Roule, will no doubt alter the character of the inhabitants, for the trowel is a more civilizing agent than is generally supposed by erecting substantial and handsome houses with porters at the doors by bordering the streets with footwalks and shop speculation, while raising the rents disperses the squalid class families, bereft of furniture and lodgers that cannot pay, and so these districts are cleared of such objectionable residents, and the dens vanish into which the police never venture, but under the sanction of the law. In June 1844, the purlieus of the Place de Labourd were still far from inviting the genteel pedestrian, who by chance should turn out of the Rue de la Pépinière into one of those dreadful side streets, would have been dismayed to see how vile a Bohemia dwelt cheek by jowl with the aristocracy, in such places as these haunted by ignorant poverty and misery, driven to bay flourish the last public letter writers who are to be found in Paris, wherever you see the two words écrivain public written in a fine copy hand on a sheet of letter paper, stuck to the window pane of some low entresol or mud-splashed ground-floor room, you may safely conclude that the neighborhood is the lurking place of many unlettered folks, and of much vice, and crime the outcome of misery, for ignorance is the mother of all sorts of crime. A crime is in the first instance a defect of reasoning powers. While the Baroness had been ill, this quarter, to which she was a minor providence, had seen the advent of a public writer, who settled in the Passage du Soleil Sun alias Spot, of which the name is one of the antitheses dear to the Parisian, for the passage is especially dark. This writer, supposed to be a German, was named Viter, and he lived on matrimonial terms with a young creature of whom he was so jealous that he never allowed her to go anywhere excepting to some honest stove and flue-fitters in the Rue Saint Lazare. Italians, as such fitters always are, but long since established in Paris. These people had been saved from a bankruptcy, which would have reduced them to misery, by the Baroness acting in behalf of Madame de la Chanterie. In a few months, comfort had taken the place of poverty, and religion had found a home in hearts, which once had cursed heaven with the energy peculiar to Italian stove-fitters. So one of Madame Hulot's first visits was to this family. She was pleased at the scene that presented itself to her eyes at the back of the house, where these worthy folks lived in the Rue Saint Lazare, not far from the Rue du Rocher, high above the stores and workshops, now well filled, where twalled a swarm of apprentices and workmen, all Italians, from the valley of Domo di Ossolate masters. Family occupied a set of rooms, which hard work had blessed with abundance. The Baroness was hailed like the Virgin Mary in person. After a quarter of an hour's questioning, Adeline, having to wait for the father to inquire how his business was prospering, pursued her saintly calling as a spy, by asking whether they knew of any families needing help. "Ah, dear lady, you who could save the damned from hell," said the Italian wife, "there is a girl quite near here to be saved from perdition." "A girl well known to you?" asked the Baroness. "She is the granddaughter of a master my husband formerly worked for, who came to France in 1798, after the Revolution, by name Giudice. Old Giudice, in Napoleon's time, was one of the principal stove-fitters in Paris. He died in 1819, leaving his son a fine fortune. But the younger Giudice wasted all his money on bad women till at last he married one who was sharper than the rest, and she had this poor little girl who has just turned 15. "And what is wrong with her?" asked Adeline, struck by the resemblance between this Giudice and her husband. "Well, madame, this child, named Atala, ran away from her father, and came to live close by here with an old German of 80 at least, named Viter, who does odd jobs for people who cannot read and write. Now, if this old sinner, who bought the child of her mother, they say, for 1,500 francs, would but marry her, as he certainly has not long to live, and as he is said to have some few thousand of francs a year, well, the poor thing, who is a sweet little angel, would be out of mischief, and above want, which must be the ruin of her. Thank you very much for the information. I may do some good, but I must act with caution. Who is the old man?" "Oh, madame, he is a good old fellow. He makes the child very happy, and he has some sense too, for he left the part of town where the Judices live, as I believe, to snatch the child from her mother's clutches. The mother was jealous of her, and I dare say she thought she could make money out of her beauty, and make a mademoiselle of the girl. Atala remembered us and advised her gentleman to settle near us, and as the good man sees how decent we are, he allows her to come here, but get them married, madame. and you will do an action, worthy of you once married the child will be independent and free from her mother, who keeps an eye on her, and who if she could make money by her would like to see her on the stage, or successful in the wicked life she meant her to lead. Why doesn't the old man marry her? There was no necessity for it, you see, said the Italian, and though old Viter is not a bad old fellow, I fancy, he is sharp enough to wish to remain the master, while if he once got married the poor man is afraid of the stone that hangs round every old man's neck. Could you send for the girl to come here, said Madame Hulot, I should see her quietly, and find out what could be done. The stove-fitter's wife signed to her eldest girl, who ran off 10 minutes later. She returned leading by the hand a child of 15 and a half, a beauty of the Italian type, Mademoiselle Giudice, inherited from her father, that ivory skin, which rather yellow by day, is by artificial light of lily witness, eyes of oriental beauty form, and brilliancy, close curling lashes, like black feathers, hair of ebony hue, and that native dignity of the Lombard race, which makes the foreigner, as he walks through Milan, on a Sunday fancy that every porter's daughter is a princess. Atala, told by the stove-fitter's daughter that she was to meet the great lady of whom she had heard so much, had hastily dressed in a black silk gown, a smart little cape, and neat boots, a cap, with a cherry-colored bow, added to the brilliant effect of her coloring. The child stood in an attitude of artless curiosity, studying the Baroness out of the corner of her eye, for her palsied trembling puzzled her greatly. Adeline sighed deeply as she saw this jewel of womanhood in the mire of prostitution, and determined to rescue her to virtue. What is your name, my dear? Atala, madame. And can you read and write? No, madame, but that does not matter, as monsieur can. Did your parents ever take you to church? Have you been to your first communion? Do you know your catechism? Madame, Papa wanted to make me do something of the kind you speak of, but Mamma would not have it. Your mother, exclaimed the Baroness, is she bad to you then? She was always beating me, I don't know why, but I was always being quarreled over by my father and mother. Did you ever hear of God? Cried the Baroness. The girl looked up witty-eyed. Oh yes, Papa and Mamma often said good God, and in God's name and God's thunder, said she with perfect simplicity. Then you never saw a church, did you? Never think of going into one? A church, Notre Dame, the Pantheon, I have seen them from a distance, when Papa took me into town, but that was not very often. There are no churches like those in the Faubourg. Which Faubourg did you live in? In the Faubourg. Yes, but which? In the Rue de Charon, madame. The inhabitants of the Faubourg Saint Antoine never call that notorious district other than the Faubourg to them. It is the one and only Faubourg, and manufacturers generally understand the words as meaning the Faubourg Saint Antoine. Did no one ever tell you what was right or wrong? Mamma used to beat me when I did not do what pleased her. But did you not know that it was very wicked to run away from your father and mother, to go to live with an old man? Atala Giudice gazed at the Baroness with a haughty stare, but made no reply. She is a perfect little savage, murmured Adeline. There are a great many like her in the Faubourg, madame, said the stove-fitter's wife. But she knows nothing, not even what is wrong. Good heavens, why do you not answer me? Said Madame Hulot, putting out her hand to take Atala's. Atala indignantly withdrew a step. You are an old fool, said she. Why, my father and mother had had nothing to eat for a week. My mother wanted me to do much worse than that, I think, for my father thrashed her, and called her a thief. However, Monsieur Viter paid all their debts and gave them some mungo, a bagful, and he brought me away, and poor Papa was crying. But we had to part. Was it wicked? She asked. And are you very fond of Monsieur Viter? Fond of him, said she, I should think so. He tells me beautiful stories, madame, every evening, and he has given me nice gowns and linen, and a shawl. Why, I am figged out like a princess. And I never wear sabots now, and then I have not known what it is to be hungry these 2 months past, and I don't live on potatoes now. He brings me bonbons and burnt almonds, and chocolate almonds errant. They good. I do anything he pleases for a bag of chocolate. Then my old daddy is very kind. He takes such care of me, and is so nice. I know now what my mother ought to have been. He is going to get an old woman to help me, for he doesn't like me to dirty my hands with cooking. For the past month, too, he has been making a little money, and he gives me 3 francs every evening that I put into a money box. Only, he will never let me out, except to come here, and he calls me his little kitten. Mamma never called me anything but bad names, and thief and vermin. Well then, my child, why should not Daddy Viter be your husband? But he is, madame, said the girl, looking at Adeline with calm pride, Without a blush, her brow smooth, her eyes steady. He told me that I was his little wife. But it is a horrid bore to be a man's wife if it were not for the burnt almonds. Good heaven, said the Baroness to herself, what monster can have had the heart to betray such perfect, such holy innocence, to restore this child to the ways of virtue? Would surely atone for many sins. I knew what I was doing, thought she, remembering the scene with Crevel, but Shesh knows nothing. Do you know Monsieur Salmon? Asked Atala, with an insinuating look. No, my child, but why do you ask? Really and truly, said the artless girl. You have nothing to fear from this lady, said the Italian woman. She is an angel. It is because my good old boy is afraid of being caught by Salmonin. He is hiding, and I wish he could be free. Why? On then, he would take me to Babino, perhaps to the Ambigue. What a delightful creature, said the Baroness, kissing the girl. Are you rich? Asked Atala, who was fingering the Baroness' lace ruffles. Yes and no, replied Madame Hulot. I am rich for dear little girls like you, when they are willing to be taught their duties as Christians by a priest, and to walk in the right way. What way is that? Said Atala. I walk on my 2 feet. The way of virtue. Atala looked at the Baroness with a crafty smile. Look at Madame, said the Baroness, pointing to the stove-fitter's wife. She has been quite happy, because she was received into the bosom of the church. You married like the beasts that perish. I said, Atala, why, if you will give me as much as Daddy Viter gives me, I shall be quite happy unmarried again. It is a grind, do you know what it is too? But when once you are united to a man, as you are, the Baroness put in, virtue requires you to remain faithful to him. Till he dies, said Atala with a knowing flash. I shall not have to wait long, if you only knew how Daddy Viter coughs and blows poof poof. And she imitated the old man. Virtue and morality require that the church representing God and the mayor representing the law should consecrate your marriage. Madame Hulot went on. Look at Madame. She is legally married. Will it make it more amusing? Asked the girl. You will be happier, said the Baroness, for no one could then blame you. You would satisfy God. Ask her if she was married without the sacrament of marriage. Atala looked at the Italian. How is she any better than I am? She asked. I am prettier than she is. Yes, but I am an honest woman, said the wife, and you may be called by a bad name. How can you expect God to protect you if you trample every law, human and divine, underfoot? Said the Baroness. Don't you know that God has paradise in store for those who obey the injunctions of his church? What is there in paradise? Are there playhouses? Paradise, said Adeline, is every joy you can conceive of. It is full of angels with white wings. You see God. In all his glory you share his power. You are happy for every minute of eternity. Atala listened to the lady, as she might have listened to music. But Adeline, seeing that she was incapable of understanding her, thought she had better take another line of action, and speak to the old man. Go home, then, my child, and I will go to see Monsieur Viter. Is he a Frenchman? He is an Alsatian, madame, but he will be quite rich soon if you would pay what he owes to that vile Salmonin. He would give you back your money, for in a few months he will be getting 6,000 francs a year, he says, and we are to go to live in the country a long way off in the Vosges. At the word Vosges, the Baroness sat lost in reverie. It called up the vision of her native village. She was roused from her melancholy meditation by the entrance of the stove-fitter, who came to assure her of his prosperity. In a year's time, madame, I can repay the money you lent us, for it is God's money, the money of the poor. And wretched if ever I make a fortune, come to me for what you want, and I will render through you the help to others which you first brought us. Just now, said Madame Hulot, I do not need your money, but I ask your assistance in a good work. I have just seen that little Judici who is living with an old man, and I mean to see them regularly and legally married. Ah, old Viter, he is a very worthy old fellow, with plenty of good sense. The poor old man has already made friends in the neighborhood. Though he has been here but 2 months, he keeps my accounts for me. He is, I believe, a brave colonel who served the emperor well. And how he adores Napoleon! He has some orders, but he never wears them. He is waiting till he is straight again, for he is in debt, poor old boy. In fact, I believe he is hiding, threatened by the law. Tell him that I will pay his debts if he will marry the child. Oh, that will soon be settled. Suppose you were to see him, madame, it is not 2 steps away in the passage du Soleil. So the lady and the stove-fitter went out. This way, madame, said the man, turning down the Rue de la Pépinière. The alley runs, in fact, from the bottom of this street, through to the Rue du Rocher. Halfway down this passage, recently opened through, where the shops let at a very low rent the Baroness saw on a window screened up to a height with a green gauze curtain, which excluded the prying eyes of the passerby the words. Écrivain public, and on the door the announcement. Business transacted. Petitions drawn up, accounts audited, etc. With secrecy and dispatch. The shop was like one of those little offices where travelers by omnibus wait the vehicles to take them on to their destination. A private staircase led up no doubt to the living rooms on the entresol, which were let with the shop. Madame Hulot saw a dirty writing table of some light with some letterboxes, and a wretched second-hand chair, a cap with a peak, and a greasy green shade for the eyes, suggested either precautions for disguise or weak eyes, which was not unlikely in an old man. He is upstairs, said the stove fitter. I will go up and tell him to come down. Adeline lowered her veil and took a seat. A heavy step made the narrow stairs creak, and Adeline could not restrain a piercing cry when she saw her husband, Baron Hulot, in a gray knitted jersey, old gray flannel trousers, and slippers. What is your business, madame? Said Hulot with a flourish. She rose, seized Hulot by the arm, and said in a voice hoarse with emotion, At last I have found you. Adeline, exclaimed the Baron in bewilderment, and he locked the shop door. Joseph, go out the back way, he added to the stove fitter. My dear, she said, forgetting everything in her excessive joy, you can come home to us. All, we are rich. Your son draws 160,000 francs a year. Your pension is released. There are 15,000 francs of arrears. You can get on showing that you are alive. Valerie is dead and left you 300,000 francs. Your name is quite forgotten by this time. You may reappear in the world, and you will find a fortune awaiting you at your son's house. Come, our happiness will be complete. For nearly 3 years, I have been seeking you, and I felt so sure of finding you that a room is ready waiting for you. Oh, come away from this, come away from the dreadful state I see you in. I am very willing, said the bewildered Baron, but can I take the girl? Hector, give her up. Do that much for your Adeline, who has never before asked you to make the smallest sacrifice. I promise you, I will give the child a marriage portion. I will see that she marries well and has some education. Let it be said of one of the women who have given you happiness that she too is happy, and do not relapse into vice, into the mire. So it was you, said the Baron with a smile, who wanted to see me married. Wait a few minutes, he added. I will go upstairs and dress. I have some decent clothes in a trunk. Adeline, left alone and looking round the squalid shop, melted into tears. He has been living here, and we rolling in wealth, said she to herself. Poor man, he has indeed been punished, who was elegance itself. The stove fitter returned to make his bow to his benefactress, and she desired him to fetch a coach when he came back. She begged him to give little Atala Judici a home, and to take her away at once. And tell her that if she will place herself under the guidance of Monsieur the Cure of the Madeleine, on the day when she attends her first communion, I will give her 30,000 francs, and find her a good husband, some worthy young man. My eldest son, then, madame, he is 22, and he worships the child. The Baron now came down. There were tears in his eyes. You are forcing me to desert the only creature who had ever begun to love me at all, as you do, said he in a whisper to his wife. She is crying bitterly, and I cannot abandon her so. Be quite easy, Hector, she will find a home with honest people, and I will answer for her conduct. Well then, I can go with you, said the Baron, escorting his wife to the cab. Hector, the Baron d'Hervey, once more had put on a blue coat and trousers, a white waistcoat, a black stock, and gloves. When the Baroness had taken her seat in the vehicle, Atala slipped in like an eel. Oh, madame, she said, let me go with you. I will be so good, so obedient. I will do whatever you wish. But do not part me from my daddy Vider, my kind daddy, who gives me such nice things. I shall be beaten. Come, come, Atala, said the Baron, this lady is my wife who must part. She as old as that, and shaking like a leaf, said the child. Look at her head. And she laughingly mimicked the Baroness' palsy. The stove fitter, who had run after the girl, came to the carriage door. Take her away, said Adeline. The man put his arms round Atala and fairly carried her off. Thanks for such a sacrifice, my dearest, said Adeline, taking the Baron's hand and clutching it with delirious joy. How much you are altered, you must have suffered so much. What a surprise for Hortense and for your son. Adeline talked as lovers talk, who meet after a long absence of 100 things at once. In 10 minutes the Baron and his wife reached the Rue Loyal Grand, and there Adeline found this note awaiting her. Madame la Baronne. Monsieur le Baron Hulot d'Hervey lived for 1 month in the Rue de Charon under the name of Thoric, an anagram of Hector he is now. In the passage Du Solil, by the name of Vitor he says he is an Alsatian and does writing, and he lives with a girl named Atala. Judici be very cautious madame for search, is on foot the baron. Is wanted on what score I know not. The actress has kept her word, and remains as ever. Madame la Baronne, your humble servant. J. Roman 1000. The baron's return was hailed with such joy, as reconciled him to domestic life. He forgot little Atala Judici, for excesses of profligacy had reduced him to the volatility of feeling that is characteristic of childhood. But the happiness of the family was dashed by the change that had come over him. He had been still hale when he had gone away from his home. He had come back almost 100 broken bent, and his expression even debased. A splendid dinner improvised by Celestine reminded the old man of the singer's banquets. He was dazzled by the splendor of his home. A feast in honor of the return of the prodigal father, said he, in a murmur to Adeline. Hush, said she, all is forgotten. And Lisbeth, he asked, not seeing the old maid. I am sorry to say that she is in bed, replied Hortense. She can never get up, and we shall have the grief of losing her ere long. She hopes to see you after dinner. At daybreak next morning, Victorine Hulot was informed by the porter's wife that soldiers of the municipal guard were posted all round the premises. The police demanded Baron Hulot, the bailiff, who had followed the woman, laid a summons in due form before the lawyer and asked him whether he meant to pay his father's debts. The claim was for 10,000 francs at the suit of an usurer named Samanon, who had probably lent the baron 2 or 3,000 at most. Victorine desired the bailiff to dismiss his men and paid. But is it the last, he anxiously wondered. Lisbeth, miserable already at seeing the family so prosperous, could not survive this happy event. She grew so rapidly worse that Bianchon gave her but a week to live, conquered at last in the long struggle in which she had scored so many victories. She kept the secret of her hatred even through a painful death from pulmonary consumption. And indeed, she had the supreme satisfaction of seeing Adeline, Hortense, Hulot, Victorine, Steinbach, Celestine, and their children standing in tears round her bed and mourning for her, as the angel of the family. Baron Hulot, enjoying a course of solid food, such as he had not known for nearly 3 years, recovered flesh and strength, and was almost himself. Again, this improvement was such a joy to Adeline that her nervous trembling perceptibly diminished. She will be happy after all, said Lisbeth to herself on the day before she died, as she saw the veneration with which the baron regarded his wife, of whose sufferings he had heard from Hortense and Victorine. And vindictiveness hastened cousin Bette's end. The family followed her weeping to the grave. The baron and baroness, having reached the age which looks for perfect rest, gave up the handsome rooms on the first floor to the Count and Countess Steinbach, and took those above. The baron, by his son's exertions, found an official position in the management of a railroad in 1845, with a salary of 6,000 francs, which added to the 6,000 of his pension, and the money left to him by Madame Crevel, secured him an income of 24,000 francs. Hortense, having enjoyed her independent income during the 3 years of separation from Wenceslas Victorin, now invested the 200,000 francs he had in trust in his sister's name, and he allowed her 12,000 francs. Wenceslas, as the husband of a rich woman, was not unfaithful, but he was an idler. He could not make up his mind to begin any work, however trifling. Once more, he became the artist in partibus. He was popular in society, and consulted by amateurs. In short, he became a critic like all the feeble folk who fall below their promise. Thus each household, though living as one family, had its own fortune. The baroness, taught by bitter experience, left the management of matters to her son, and the baron was thus reduced to his salary in hope that the smallness of his income would prevent his relapsing into mischief, and by some singular good fortune, on which neither the mother nor the son had reckoned, Hulot seemed to have forsworn the fair sex. His subdued behavior, ascribed to the course of nature, so completely reassured the family that they enjoyed to the full his recovered amiability and delightful qualities. He was unfailingly attentive to his wife and children, escorted them to the play, reappeared in society, and did the honors to his son's house with exquisite grace. In short, this reclaimed prodigal was the joy of his family. He was a most agreeable old man, a ruin, but full of wit, having retained no more of his vice than made it an added social grace. Of course, everybody was quite satisfied, and easy. The young people and the baroness lauded the model father to the skies forgetting the death of the two uncles' life, cannot go on without much forgetting. Madame Victorin, who managed this enormous household with great skill, due no doubt to Lisbeth's training, had found it necessary to have a man-cook. This again necessitated a kitchen-maid. Kitchen-maids are in these days ambitious creatures eager to detect the chef's secrets, and to become cooks as soon as they have learnt to stir a sauce. Consequently, the kitchen-maid is liable to frequent change. The beginning of 1845, Celestine engaged as kitchen-maid a sturdy Normandy peasant come from Isigny, short-waisted, with strong red arms, a common face as dull as an occasional piece at the play, and hardly to be persuaded out of wearing the classical linen cap peculiar to the women of Lower Normandy. This girl, as buxom as a wet nurse, looked as if she would burst the blue cotton check, in which she clothed her person. Her florid face might have been hewn out of stone, so hard were its tawny outlines. Of course, no attention was paid to the advent in the house of this girl, whose name was Agathian, ordinary wide-awake specimen, such as is daily imported from the provinces. Agathe had no attractions for the cook. Her tongue was too rough, for she had served in a suburban inn waiting on carters, and instead of making a conquest of her chief and winning from him the secrets of the high art of the kitchen, she was the object of his great contempt. The chef's attentions were in fact devoted to Louise. The Countess Steinbach's maid, the country girl, thinking herself illused, complained bitterly that she was always sent out of the way on some pretext, when the chef was finishing a dish or putting the crowning touch to a sauce. "I am out of luck," said she, "and I shall go to another place." And yet she stayed, though she had twice given notice to quit. One night Adeline, roused by some unusual noise, did not see Hector in the bed he occupied near hers, for they slept side by side in two beds. As beseemed an old couple, she lay awake an hour. But he did not return. Seized with a panic, fancying some tragic end had overtaken him, an apoplectic attack perhaps, went upstairs to the floor, occupied by the servants, and then was attracted to the room where Agathe slept, partly by seeing a light below the door, and partly by the murmur of voices. She stood still in dismay on recognizing the voice of her husband, who, a victim to Agathe's charms to vanquish this strapping wench's not disinterested resistance, went to the length of saying, "My wife has not long to live, and if you like you may be a baroness." Adeline gave a cry, dropped her candlestick, and fled. 3 days later, the baroness, who had received the last sacraments, was dying, surrounded by her weeping family. Just before she died, she took her husband's hand and pressed it, murmuring in his ear, "My dear, I had nothing left to give up to you, but my life. In a minute or two you will be free, and can make another Baron Hulot." And rare sight, tears oozed from her dead eyes. This desperateness of vice had vanquished the patience of the angel, who, on the brink of eternity, gave utterance to the only reproach she had ever spoken in her life. The Baron left Paris 3 days after his wife's funeral, 11 months after Victorin heard indirectly of his father's marriage to Mademoiselle Agathe Piquetard, solemnized at Isigny on the 1st February 1846. Parents may hinder their children's marriage, but children cannot interfere with the insane acts of their parents in their second childhood, said Maître Hulot to Maître Popinot, the second son of the Minister of Commerce, who was discussing this marriage.